Our second speaker is Thomas Estes, who is currently completing a doctoral program in higher education at Northwind Theological Seminary under the direction of Thomas J. Ord. Thomas lives with his wife Bailey in Abilene, Texas, where he serves as a pastor at the Cottonwood Baptist Church. Isn't that a wonderful Texas sound? And teaches at the Hardin-Simmons University. In his copious free time, he writes songs, wrestles with philosophical relationships of hope, beauty, and tragedy. What a great wrestle. Estes' paper is titled Pedagogies of the Possible, Beauty, Tragedy, and Hope in Higher Education. Please welcome Thomas Estes.
All right. Well, I'll try not to embarrass my advisor since he's in the room. But, I'm also acutely aware that I've only known about process thought for probably 3 or 4 years now, and I'm going on my 4th year in higher education. So your experience vastly outweighs mine, but I would like to offer some thoughts in hopes of stimulating some dialogue. So. I suspect most people teaching in higher education remember something beautiful that attracted them as students. For me, the professor's office, among other things, had a powerful aesthetic appeal. Shelves bursting at the seams with books. Some professors had more books than others. Symbolized fecund knowledge and the noble discipline of a life devoted to wisdom. I felt the serenity of being surrounded by volumes huddled quietly together, but I also sensed that time-word binding struggled to contain the vitality of worlds waiting to be discovered therein. As part of a library, each text gained intensity and contributed to the massive feeling of the whole, as Whitehead would say. So the professor's office was alluring. It was an enchanted space, a holy ground that opened possibilities that altered the trajectory of my life. But when I finally had the opportunity to decorate my own office as a fledgling instructor, heartbreak overshadowed most of the delight. The small private university that hired me was coming off the first what would become several years of program closures and faculty layoffs. My interview for a full-time position resulted in a part-time contract within an already diminished school of theology. The board of trustees decided to shutter our seminary and its graduate programs before the year's end. Suddenly, a building that housed a faculty staff of 16 now held only 4. And my desk felt less like a sanctuary and more like a lonely island in a tempest of anxiety and grief. Whitehead, I think, spoke truly. It seems to be in the nature of things that youthful dreams yield harvests of tragedy. Higher education's problems are evident and well documented. There's no need to rehearse them all here, but just to name a few, despite good intentions, the American university system often reinforces social inequality instead of mitigating it. Students are burdened with debt, adjuncts are exploited, political battles over curriculum and academic freedom are now a regular feature of the daily news. Then there is the enrollment crisis. College participation has been trending downward since 2009. There appears to be no end in sight. Indeed, many are warning of an impending enrollment cliff after 2025 because of the steep decline in birth rate during the Great Recession. A general population with fewer college-age individuals does not bode well for the viability of many institutions that are already shrinking and struggling to survive. And as someone who has invested so much preparing for a potential future in higher education, it's easy to despair. Prospects look bleak. At the same time, my Christian faith tradition reminds me that death precedes new life. The present form of this world is passing away. The disquietude of our here and now, its political challenges and ecological crises, its peculiar sorrows and existential unease, asks something more of us, a broader and less restrained imagination. It calls us to string our bows together and cast the arrows of our longing beyond the present form of this world. But cast them where and toward what? And that question is raised by Miroslav Volf and Ryan McAnally-Liz. As I have wrestled with these questions, process thinkers have been constant companions and sources of hope and courage. Moreover, the Center for Process Studies has played no small role in encouraging that work, and for that I'm profoundly grateful. So let me begin with Whitehead, who helps us to see that education is much bigger than schooling. The subject of education, he says, is life in all its manifestations. So on the one hand, this memorable, if hyperbolic, epigram suggests that education aims for artful living and not merely information transfer. On the other hand, it illustrates how the seamless coat of learning must transcend the classroom to be as extensive as life. The system as such misses too many people, too many years of their lives, and too much of life's wide variety. One of Whitehead's conversations with Lucius Price illustrates this point, I think. Whitehead's reflecting on how Americans can give a good education not to a few, but to all. He says this: I would be inclined to require universal education, say, up to the age of 16. Then between 16 and 19, infuse it with the elements of practicality. After that, there would need to be widest possible access to opportunity for further study, both in institutions and outside of them, as by university extension lecturers, so that people could satisfy their curiosity about all sorts of subjects and find their special aptitudes. Their reading, too, would be enlivened by personal association with lecturers. I would make some of this advanced education compulsory and keep up the process of education to the age of 90. So I've seen John and Marjorie and others here who are, living that before our eyes. And then Whitehead closes with this thought: mind you, I doubt if these great universities with their high concentrations of specialized learning and societies of scholars so shut off from the daily lives of average people are altogether a good thing. While universities may not be altogether a good thing, I experienced a transformative pedagogy of the possible coming up at small liberal arts colleges. In using this phrase, I'm following Vlad Glavenou, who perceptibly observes that although the possible is ever present, its exploration cannot be taken for granted. Openness to differences and to the novelties that emerge from engaging with them is not a given, but something to be taught, to be modeled. And to their credit, several of my professors kept differences in play, giving me a fair chance at becoming a subject beyond the cultural conditioning of my childhood. And so the sorrow I feel as I watch these institutions decline flows from a shared history and experiences of value. That said, Whitehead's comments about opportunities for study both in institutions and outside of them reminds us that while universities can facilitate contact with the possible, they are neither its source nor our only place of access. The possible is not a creature of the university, it's the other way around. So, assuming the Earth survives, and I'll come back to this point, we may take some solace in knowing that possibilities for zest and well-being will outlive the death of beloved institutions, just as they outrun the reach of harmful institutions that employ what Glavenou would call pedagogies of the non-possible. So rather than the impossible, which is a dialogue companion of the possible, the non-possible is what results from intentional and unintentional denial of difference. So it's characterized by sameness, monologism, absolutism, etc. So depending on who you ask, the modern research university may be an example of this latter dogmatic kind of institution. John Cobb, for example, has long argued that these schools are anti-intellectual insofar as they maintain uncritical commitments to problematic metaphysical assumptions, disciplinary fragmentation, and pretensions of being value-free. Remaining closed to process thought, addicted to narrow abstractions, selling their services to the highest bidder, they produce experts who see the world in the way the university has socialized them to see it, and then proceed to lead the world into more catastrophes than they help us avoid. And chief among these catastrophes, of course, is the current ecological crisis. And Marcus Ford similarly condemns universities for participating in the breakdown of human communities, the destruction of the natural world, granting that they have also facilitated enrichment and scholarship and scientific advance, creative endeavors. Ford nevertheless claims that fundamental changes are necessary. So he says, quote, "The university must share some of the blame for the destruction of the natural world and for the increasing disparity between rich and poor nations and the rich and poor within nations, both because it tends to legitimate the logic of these activities and because it has not, on the whole, articulated a way of thinking about reality in which the destruction of the natural world for the sake of economic gain, especially when that gain benefits only a very few, is wrong. The university then is culpable both for what it does and for what it has been unable to do." And he continues, if the universities become a force for good in the world, it will need to move beyond academic disciplines, philosophical materialism, economism. We'll need to embrace or endorse a worldview that affirms the meaningfulness of human life, the intrinsic value of all the earth and its inhabitants, and the relational aspects of life. Ford would use Whitehead's pan-experientialist philosophy of organism as an alternative worldview for what he calls a constructive postmodern university, so building here off the work of David Ray Griffin. 2 decades later, however, process thought continues to be marginalized in many disciplines, or at least doesn't carry some of the influence that we might hope. So what now? Should we hasten or cheer higher education's demise? Institutions that are no longer financially sustainable will, of course, disappear whether we applaud or weep. The more pressing question may be what to do with financially solvent but ecologically irresponsible institutions. Again, I find Whitehead's counsel to be wise, and this is a quote that you just read, actually. So the art of progress is to preserve order amid change. It's order entering upon novelty, so the massiveness of order does not degenerate into mere repetition, and so that novelty is always reflected upon a background of system. So for good or evil, it seems institutions are necessary to organize, sustain human communities, practices, and cultural movements. With Ford, I would rather see us work to change these schools rather than abolish the infrastructure. But these institutions are stubborn, so we should also cast a wider net, I think. First, concerning the urgent need to transform higher education, the theoretical work accomplished by the center's members is a veritable library of hope. And by hope, I mean a particular crystallization of desire constituted in the need to imagine an alternative world and to imagine it in a way that enables one to act in the present as if this alternative had already begun to emerge. Hope is soberer than optimism. It can admit that the appalling has already happened. It knows that there are no guarantees of progress, however we might imagine that. Nevertheless, hope holds fast to its conviction that a more beautiful world is possible and works for the good, even with no certainty of success. Process scholars have articulated beautiful visions of a constructive postmodern university for ecological education. Repent and believe the good news. The final word has not been spoken, but scholars like Cobb and Griffin, and I'm going to forget some here, but I would also name George Allen, Malcolm Evans, Marcus Ford, Mary Elizabeth Moore, Adam Scarf have prepared the way. In forging this legacy, they have opened possibilities for those of us who follow. A valid future is now discernible, if dimly, in our present. Second, faced with the impending collapse of neoliberal economism and our intransigent alma matres that serve as its adjuncts, a more significant share of responsibility for value-affirming higher education will fall outside and alongside the current university system. Government agencies, NGOs, corporations, charitable groups, voluntary associations of humanitarians, poets, musicians, and artists need to work together in this long march to an ecological civilization. We need more organizations like the Center for Process Studies, the Cobb Institute, the Institute for Ecological Civilization to cultivate an appreciation for the broader web of life and competence for inhabiting the earth with more humility and grace. Not least among these skills are an expanded aesthetic horizon and concrete vision, trained to recognize forms of beauty and achievements of value. So Robert Brumbaugh long ago said that the notion of concrete vision is the most important contribution process philosophy can add to a theory of education, a process philosophy theory of education. So process relational thought remains a tremendous resource in this educational endeavor, I think both inside and outside the university. Like Wordsworth before him, Whitehead sees into the life of things. And this is crucial because to the degree we remain metaphysically blind to the ubiquity of non-human value experiences, we will not likely honor and protect them. Many who look with Whitehead find themselves lured by the beauty of a world in which all things have value for themselves, others, and the whole. And in these cases, process philosophy acts as a kind of salve of dirt and spittle applied to the eye of spiritual perception for its healing. I don't know if O'Neill is still here, but he's talking about the ground as our ground of being, and it just strikes me that Jesus, in order to heal the man's vision, literally applies the ground to his eye. Then we can say with the poet, through primrose tufts and in green bower, the periwinkle trailed its wreaths, and 'tis my faith that every flower enjoys the air it breathes. As a Christian pastor, I'd also underline the importance of humankind's various faith communities and wisdom traditions, working to educate our affections and lead us in the ways of love. In Christianity, for example, the two great commandments each deal with love because humans are lovers. They have desires. Following Jesus and the prophets of Israel before him, Christians reckon that the world can only experience abundant life if humans rightly order our affections, nesting love for self and others within a prior love for the whole, or God that sustains both. And the ecological educator David Orr also stresses the priority of love. Quote, "We ought not to look first to our technological cleverness or abstractions about progress of one kind or another, but rather to the extent and depth of our affections, which set boundaries on what we do and direct our intelligence to better or worse possibilities. The possibility of affection for our children, place, posterity, and life is in all of us. It's part of our evolutionary heritage. It's embedded in our best religious teachings. And it's now a matter of simple self-interest that we come to realize the full extent of the obligations that arise from an alert, thorough, and far-sighted affection," end quote. In Orr's judgment, humans must reach even deeper than a cool respect for nature, as only a full-blooded love is strong enough to transcend narrow self-interest and motivate us to look to the needs of others. And I agree. Empathetic imagination is an initial step, but sustaining care for others seems to require a kind of covenant, a bond of love capable of enduring inconvenience and disappointment without dissolving. And I think too often lost in the academy is any sense that the self is one of the primary subjects of education. We would be foolish not to seek wisdom among spiritual disciplines of our various faith traditions. Inert ideas are not yet transformation. And the creation is groaning while waiting for the children of God. So for each succeeding generation, Whitehead says, the problem of education is new. The crisis of our age is an ecological disaster that implicates every facet of human life, including education. Therefore, the journey toward ecological civilization demands a corresponding adventure in higher education that includes, but I think exceeds, the confines of the university. At the level of the individual, we should remember our own agency. Those who hope for the good should be the good that they hope for. Augustine said that long ago. But this center is also a testimony to the value of meeting together. Suppose process thinkers cannot affect top-down change from within the university system. In that case, there still are opportunities to work from the outside in, or maybe just outside, collaborating together to create alternative providers of a higher education that goes beyond mere socialization and credentialing. So I think as we provoke one another to love and good deeds, we cultivate hope. And to quote Whitehead once more, courage and hope are the best armor with which to meet a revolution, and above all, mutual sympathy. Thank you.